Şimdi yeni bir yazara geliyoruz, William Carlton. The period between Catholic emancipation and the famine was a time of weak reform in Ireland and thus a period of particular anthropological interest in the habits of the Irish peasantry. This was the context for the work of the peasant novelist William Carlton, from Co Tyrone. Converting to Puritanism in early adulthood, he began to move in evangelical circles and wrote short stories in the late 1820s and early 1830s, which were hostile to Catholicism and yet deeply insightful into peasant Catholic life. His tone had begun to moderate when he turned to writing novels in the late 1830s, not least because he was being published by Catholic as well as Protestant publishers. Fardo the Miser is a morality story with little specifically religious context. Like Silas Marner, Fardo's problem is an awareness which even he comes to recognize as a disability. I can cry, but I am still as hard as a stone. The death sentence, later changed to transportation, which his affectionate and loyal son Connor incurs for arson, is the result of the machinations of a rival in love, but it is attributed to God's punishment for Fargo's refusal initially to welcome his son as a blessing. This may be a superstition, according to Carlton, but it is one he approves of, and it provides the story with a moral theology. As Fargo's conversion to feeling coincides with his son's vindication, Carlton complements the focus on individual morality with a critic of Irish social morality. Burada önemli. Critic of Irish society morality, which approved of the culture of revenge, the sacred code of perverted honor by which Irishmen are guided. In his preface to Valentine McClatchy, the Irish agent, Carlton signals that this novel is to be something new, though he has not abandoned his conservatism. The work will be an attack on the Orange Order. Buna bir bakın internette, Orange Order bulursunuz. And its links with the established church and on landlords. The novel is said to be set in 1804, but it is clear from its descriptions of the attempts by evangelicals to convert Catholics, and Carlton has this period from the 1820s onward very much in mind. The long and rambling plot centers around machinations of Val, the vulture McClatchy, and his son Phil, who are corrupt land agents for Lord Cumber and pillars of the Orange Order. Things are put right when Cumber's brother, who has already inserted himself as an anonymous observer into the situation, inherits the title and estate. He reflects that until property in this unfortunate country is placed upon an equal footing between landlord and tenant, so long will there be bloodshed and crime. The narrator emphasizes the point to its landlord readers. Think of this, gentlemen, and pay attention to your duties. The novel satirizes representatives of various religious denominations. The violently zealous Catholic curate Patrick McCabe, Solomon McSlime, dissenter, evangelical zealot, corrupt attorney, and sexually abusive employer, and the Reverend Phineas Luce, ambitious established church parson, who in Dublin worshipped the Lord Lieutenant, and in London the King, whilst his curate was only worshipping God in the country. There are two good clerics, Mr. Clement Luke's aforementioned curate, who believes in Catholic emancipation and is opposed to the evangelicals, and the Catholic parish priest, Fr. Francis Roche. Carlton tries to endear Roche to those of his readers who were not Catholics, though reviled by McClatchy. sorry, the priest manages to frustrate two plots against the agent's life, thus acting as a restraint on social disturbance. And as a religious figure, he is portrayed as, in fact, being mildly Protestant. He recites prayers for a dying man, replete with the fervor of Christian faith, to raise the soul to hopes of mortality. His primary authority comes not from his office, but from his personal integrity. Will you obey the old man who loves you? He thus pleads with one group contemplating violence. Another character on his deathbed rebuffs both Youth and McCabe in favor of Roche. Here is a Christian gentleman, and under his ministry I will die. Though Catholic writers later in the century were keen to present priests as exercising a social constraint, it was within a context of accentuated rather than elided denominational differences. Like its two predecessors, The Black Prophet, A Tale of Irish Famine, has a monstrous patriarch as its core. Donald Dew, the Black Prophet, claims to be the seventh son of the seventh son. He is a prophecy man, making his living in a predicting good or bad fortune and exploiting current millenarian expectations among the peasantry. Gördüğünüz gibi burada da artık dini ögeler daha çok ağırlık basıyor. Written during the Great Famine, in part as a plea for a relief, the novel is yet set in 1820 and draws on Carleton's experience of earlier famines, particularly in 1817, to paint harrowing pictures of the effects of starvation and disease, especially social disintegration. The novel is a murder mystery, a love story, and in the case of the prophet's daughter Sarah, a story of moral regeneration. Carleton occasionally sermonizes about religious toleration. It is not for those who differ with them in creed to quarrel with the form of prayer when the heart is moved as theirs were, by earnestness and humble piety. And the prophet's final unredeemed condition is testified by the fact that he refused all religious consolation before his execution after his various crimes catch up with him. However, religious is really of less interest in the novel than folk belief and practice. It is only after one of the characters dies, for example, that someone remembers to mention that he had received the last rites of the church. The Emigrants of Hadra combines criticism of the land system with praise for the more prosperous Catholic farmers as an indispensable class for the prosperity of the country. Daha önemli bir eser. Unrenewed leases, illicit stills, controversial elections, treacherous friends, and conflicted lovers are spiced by the exotic presence of Hissy Burke, a self-styled chattered libertine, who tells his mother that a neighboring family is but an upstart one at best. It wants an antiquity man. Sober Brian McMahon, to Hissy, a clod-hopping boor of the mountain farm of Ahadra, is beset by many trials and narrowly avoids having to emigrate. He is a representative of the independent class of farmers and yeomen, which for Ireland is the very class of persons that constitute its remaining strength. At the end of the novel, the landlord tells his father, "The country cannot spare such men as you and your admirable son." McMahon is denounced from the altar by the local curator and subsequently dragged from the chapel and beaten for the way he has voted at the election. However, the narrator denounces such priests as low and bigoted firebrands and reassures the reader that such sins are repulsive to the educated priest. Indeed, the cleric in question is reprimanded, and the parish priest assures everyone that a single word of politics I shall never suffer to be preached from the altar while I live. Of more significance, perhaps, is the way in which Kathleen Kavanagh, whose impending marriage to McMahon is delayed by disputes over his voting behavior, is criticized. Dora McMahon wishes she'd be more of a woman and less of a saint. Burada da biraz bakın dikkat edin, yavaş yavaş kadınların seslerini duyurma ihtiyacı çıkıyor. And caustically hopes she will marry the Pope, for I don't know any other husband that's fit for her. In these respects, the novel anticipates the satiric tone of some intelligentsia novelists of half a century later. Now we come to another one, Victorian Catholic fiction. In the interim fiction, writing by Catholics tended to become the preserve of those who were keen to vindicate the Victorian respectability of Ireland, and especially of the Irish peasantry, as the most politically visible class as far as English audiences were concerned. Many of these were middle class women writers, clustered around the Irish Monthly, a review founded in 1873 by the Jesuit literator Matthew Russell. They included M. F. Francis, Etty O'Brien, and Catherine Tynan, though May Laffan derided Catholic presentations to respectability. By the 1880s, some of these novelists were projecting a conclusion to the land war conducive to their class interests. Marcella Grace by Rosa Mulholland, one of the most important of these Catholic gentry novels, imagines the advantages of a new class of Catholic landlords. Its heroine, a poor Dublin Catholic girl, inherits a large estate and manages it well in the face of opposition from almost all shades of political opinion. Novels were little read in the wider community apart from Knocknagow by Charles Kickham, which achieved an unlikely totemic status, given its author's controversial status as a fanon at odds with the Church. Russell's 1887 preface to the novel, with its recollections of Kickham's religious faith, helped create a more acceptably pious version of the author. The novel is a saga of Irish rural life, of venal land agents and long-suffering leaseholders, of evictions, poverty, and emigration. The key to its success was its capacity to present an oppressed community that was riven with conflict and yet simultaneously united and harmonious. This duality mirrored that of the self-image of the island that emerged triumphant from the land war and whose values would soon be so execrated by the Catholic intelligentsia. It was an island of shopkeepers and farmers who saw themselves as the heirs to a noble history of suffering, but who, in the pheasant ownerships of farms, the fruit of the land war, had reached a settlement which must not be disturbed. Unlike Griffin in the Collegians, Kickham is demonstrative in the central role he gives to Catholic religious practice in the life of the locality. The chief communal events in the opening chapters of the book are the Christmas morning Mass in Kilhubbard Chapel and a station Mass held in the home of the principal family in the novel, the middle-class Kearneys. These latter masses were biennial events in particular parts of parish to enable people to go to confession and communion. The Mass at the Kearneys is conduced with decorum and piety. The confessions are heard with propriety, and the priests involved are noted for their frugality and lack of avarice. Before the devotional revolution, these were three issues about which concern was very often raised. Knockernall thus subtly acknowledges the reforms as well as the greater religious uniformity. of the previous quarter century.